All right, to all who are new here, especially those who learned about us this weekend at ATAF, welcome. My name is Dr. Michelle Henney, and I'd like to welcome you to Rehabilitation Sports Medicine's Virtual Journal Club. For additional webinar educational opportunities, you can visit our website and register directly for the webinar, or you can sign up for the email list to be notified of upcoming webinars. We are continuing to update our schedule, so check back often. This video will be available for review after this journal club. The information contained in the video content represents the views and opinions of the presenters and does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Rehabilitation Sports Medicine. The mere appearance of video content on the website does not constitute an endorsement by RSM or its affiliates of such video content. The video content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The video content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health care provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have read or seen on the site. RSM hereby disclaims any and all liability to any party for any direct, indirect, implied, punitive, special, incidental, or other consequential damages arising directly or indirectly from any use of the video content, which is provided as is and without warranties. We are looking for an athletic trainer to join our team. This is a full-time clinic-based position working in a sports medicine clinic. Please feel free to pass our information along if you know of a qualified candidate. More information regarding applying can be found on our website. For all athletic trainers who are intending to get live CEUs from the BOC, you will receive an email 1 hour after the webinar concludes, which includes a link to the combined quiz, evaluation, and assessment. You will have up to 72 hours to complete the quiz and the evaluation. This email will come from customercare@gotowebinar.com. Please ensure that this is done to receive your statement of credit. If you do not receive the follow-up email or you have any other concerns, then contact us via our email at journalclub@relevatesportsmedicine.com. Once the statement of credit is available for download from our website, you will receive an email notification. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit the question and we will review questions at the conclusion of the presentation. If you cannot see the PowerPoint slides and you're accessing the webinar from your mobile phone, swipe the screen to the left or to the right and the slides will become visible. The recording will be available for review from our website tomorrow. Dr. Andy Seraphin is a physical therapist who founded the Futbol Physios in New Jersey. He did his undergraduate training at Temple University in Kinesiology, and his DPT program was completed at Duke University. He completed his sports physical therapy residency at Orlando Health, working with Orlando City Soccer Club and the Orlando Pride. He is going to be speaking today about the benefits of speed and strength training for soccer players, how to implement it within a practical training session, and how it relates to overall player health and wellness. He will also have a very exciting update to his current career path and his current job, but I'll let him go ahead and present that on his own, and you are going to be receiving a pop-up window to share your screen, and I'll let you take it away.
All right, I just have to go in my system preferences and allow for it. I'll click this. It looks like I have to quit the app and reopen to share my screen, so I'm going to do that real quick. Okay.
All right. You should get that button to pop up here.
Here we go. Okay. We are good. Perfect.
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. So let's go to presenter view and voila. Okay. So hello, everybody. My name is Andy. I'm the founder of the Futbol Physios, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about speed and strength training specifically for soccer players. And I think this is where the future of performance staff in strength and conditioning, athletic training, physical therapy. This is where I think the future is going. I think that all of our professions have advanced to the point where we have the basics down and we know how to keep players relatively safe and healthy on game day. And what we're looking to do in this presentation is to help give just a little bit of foundational knowledge to improve their performance. I think this is a huge opportunity for everybody in the sports field of sports medicine. If you guys have questions during the conversation, be sure to throw them in the chat and we'll try to address them all at the end. And yeah, here we go. In terms of conflicts of interest, I don't have any. And yeah, so about me, I'm from the wonderful state of New Jersey, land of the best, I think, pizza and bagels out there. And New Jersey is my home. And I've kind of traveled up and down the East Coast a little bit, like Doc said. I just first studied at Temple University in Philly, and then I went to Duke for PT school, went to Florida for a little bit, and now I'm back. But my journey in the sport of soccer started when I was very young. I believe this picture here, and that's the little red arrow pointing towards me. I think that was first grade. And one of the most important things about the game of soccer is you can play it from age 2 to 82. There really is no limit. And you'll especially see this if you kind of look at the game in grassroots clubs overseas. Unfortunately, in America, we tend to stop our sports at college if you don't go on to play professionally. But overseas and even clubs around here, they have leagues over 30, over 40, over 50, where you can stay active in the game as long as you really want to. Unfortunately, a lot of people tend to leave the game due to injury, and they happen to get an injury and they're not strong enough, they're not fast enough, or they feel like they lost a step, and for whatever reason, they don't feel safe going back. And a lot of the things that we learn today are going to help you empower your clients who maybe they suffered quite a bad injury in high school or college or wherever environment that they're in, and they want to play the game throughout their entire life. And maybe through some of the exercises and treatment strategies that we go over today, you can help them do that. So like I said, I first studied at Temple University. I got a degree in exercise science there. At that time, I wasn't really too interested in, I think, sports medicine. I was very much kind of confused in terms of what I wanted to do. When I got to Duke, that changed a little bit. I had the opportunity to shadow some of the best PTs in the country there at Duke Sports Medicine, and I got to see how they conducted themselves with local clubs. And that's when I knew like soccer was something I really wanted to hone in on. And throughout my graduate education and ever since, I've done quite a bit of studies in terms of continuing education. And these are, I think, things that you guys as athletic trainers can do as well. Having a strong strength and conditioning base is so important. And the CSCS, I think, is one of the first steps that anybody in sports medicine can do to start to learn more about strength and conditioning. Because depending on your environment, you may or may not be the only one there from start to finish when it comes to injury to performance or going from the clinic to the field. And without the CSCS and a more complete strength and conditioning background, you may or may not be able to confidently deliver the end stage rehab needs. And I think the CSCS is a great place to start to learn some of that. If you're working with a soccer team in particular, one of the most important things that you can do is build a strong relationship with the rest of your coaching staff. And sometimes team sports and team coaches, they're a little bit tough to deal with, especially if it's with a sport that you're not totally familiar with. But US Soccer has a fantastic coaching licensing program where you can take several courses online or in person where you can learn the basics of coaching a soccer session. And will most of us go on to coach a soccer team? No. But if we're able to speak their language and we're able to have a conversation with them, that relationship grows and that relationship builds. And because of that, you're now better able to serve the athletes that you're sharing. And I think it's so important that, sometimes when you hear soccer coaches speak, it's like a foreign language. And if you're able to learn just a little bit of that language through maybe a 3-4 hour course online, then I think it'll really help that relationship in the long run. Another one that I have is the FIFA medical diploma. This is free, and they actually just redid the entire platform. It is fantastic, and it even has like up-to-date things like COVID protocols on it. Essentially, the best doctors that consult with FIFA put together a free, I think it's like 40 or 50 hour course where it'll break it down body part by body part, exactly how to evaluate and treat each specific injury. And it also goes into the more medical side of, oh, this is the things you should have in your medical bag. And, we should have this protocol for lightning strikes, and we should have this protocol in terms of what we're doing for travel. Again, completely free. It took me quite a long time to do it, but it's something that you can do in your spare time if you happen to have it in the off season. So in terms of my experience so far, I've worked with North Carolina FC, with their youth academy, as well as with their first team, interning with their strength and conditioning, and then also with NC Courage, the women's team, interning with their strength and conditioning staff as well. Last year, I was doing a sports medicine residency in Orlando Health, where I also worked with Orlando City, helping to lead the rehabs for their academy and their B team, as well as doing some research initiatives for the Orlando Pride. And I recently accepted a position with Red Bull, and I'll be helping their academy in terms of strength and conditioning and rehab for their teams from U12 all the way up to U17. And then I also have my own company where I help teams and individuals on the side with any of their fitness and rehab needs. If you guys want to follow on social media, feel free. Dr. Andy DBT on Twitter, and then the Futbol Physios on Instagram. And yeah, so let's get into the main crux of what this talk is all about. And I really think this slogan, which I really do live by, is where the future of medicine and performance is going in soccer. And the mission is to help make soccer players stronger, faster, and as healthy as possible. Again, stronger, faster, and keeping them as healthy as possible. This is so important. And if you actually look at the literature overseas in the Premier League and the Champions League, team health is so important for any team goal, whether it be a youth team who's trying to develop young talent, whether it be a team in the lower divisions who's trying to win promotion and get up to the higher tiers, or whether you're a national team competing for a World Cup. If you're healthy, you're more likely to reach your goals. And in most cases, that goal is to win. But in other cases, like if you're with an academy team, the goal may be player development, right? Whatever your goal is, if you keep your team healthy, you're more likely to reach it. Now, stronger and faster, these are so important as well, because if you're stronger, you're more likely healthy, right? And you're more likely to be able to endure the rigors of the season that's ahead of you. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is how do I implement these strength programs in a way that's realistic and doable. And faster teams are better. And the game is getting more physical and more physical. And if you're able to make a player faster, then guess what? That coach now loves you, and you're going to be the first one they call. And the players are going to love you too, because every kid out there wants to be a faster and more powerful player. So that's really our mission today, is going past the realm of I will keep you together and healthy versus I will make you stronger and faster, and I'll keep you healthier for longer because of that. So yeah, we're going to get into speed and strength for soccer, and we're going to talk about it in a very practical way. We're going to break it down into the elements of a typical soccer training session. So this is specific to soccer, but if you work in other sports, you'll likely see that these elements are relatively the same across all sports. First, we have the warm-up, which as an athletic trainer, you guys may or may not have the ability to say, hey, I'm responsible for the health of these athletes. Warm-ups are super important. I'm going to make sure that I take charge of that. Within the warm-up or directly after the warm-up, you can do some speed and strength training. After that, the head coach will likely take over the session, and they'll deliver all of the stuff that has a very strong neurocognitive focus, things like technical training and going through tactics. And after that, after their minds are kind of worked through, then they'll either do small-sided games or a scrimmage. And after that, you as the athletic trainer may step in and say, okay, let's do a nice cool down. Or maybe if there are strength exercises that we didn't get to at the beginning of the session, let's throw a few of those in at the end of the session as part of our cool down. And that may seem like a lot, but again, these 3 arrows are the areas where the sports medicine staff really can help to take charge of. And it's a very small segment of the training session, right? This session right here, if you add up the arrows, it's about 7 to 15 minutes, but that time frame is so important. So typically, this is what teams do for warm up. If a sport coach is in charge, or if they're old school, they may do something like this, right? And again, this can apply to any sport. Run a few laps around the field, right? Then maybe go into a circle, do some static stretching for 3 to 5 minutes, and then it's okay. Let's kind of walk back and forth, stretch the hamstring a little bit, stretch the quad a little bit, and then do some ball work like a rondo for the rest of the warm up. Now, again, this is something that will, one, it is a warm up, which is nice and it's somewhat effective, but it's not going to take your team and your athletes to the next level. It's not going to make them stronger, more powerful, and it's not going to keep them much more healthy than honestly not doing a warm up. So we like to do what is called a high performance warm up. A high performance warm up is very different because you're taking something called ramp, right? So in any good warm up, you have 4 letters, R-A-M-P, where you're raising the temperature, you're starting to activate different musculature, you're going through all sorts of different mobility programs, and then at the end, you're preparing the athlete for whatever activity they're about to do. And the difference in this warm-up is this warm-up is specific to every session the athlete may do. This warm-up here, it's generic. You can do it on any day. In fact, you don't even have to be there to do it. The sport coach can do it themselves. But this is very specific to what the athlete is about to do. Now, at the beginning, again, we're just increasing the heart rate, raising the temperature of the body. That's relatively easy. Then we're going to do mobility activation, right? Now, what happens if you're doing more of a small-sided session compared to a 9v9 or 11v11, right? If we're in a small-sided session, then we might start to say, okay, well, we're working in small spaces today. Deceleration is super important. We're going to make sure in our activation, we're going to include some quad work because quads are super important for deceleration. Or let's say, we're going to do a lot of defending today, right? Defending means moving in the frontal plane, side to side. So we're going to make sure we do some mobility work for the groin because they're going to be very active today. Again, specific to the session. And again, this is another reason why I think getting a coaching license may be really important, because now you can look at what the coach is planning for the day and you can plan your warm-up in advance, and the head coach will notice that. After that, movement prep, right? So things like, going into sprint drills, being able to help the athletes coach through these movements and having them do it at the beginning of the session when they're fresh. Their bodies are fresh and their minds are fresh, so they're able to better comprehend the movements that you're teaching. And then after that, you have to include technical and ball work. You have to, because this is what you need, that ball sharpness before you go in with the rest of the team. Now, that might be something the head coach or the assistant coach might do instead, but if they're not going to do it, be sure that you have the capability to at least do something ball related in the session, because once you add the ball, then their brains turn on and they're ready to go. So that's super important. Again, so those first 3, about 7 to 15 minutes, depending on the space, the time, the age of the athlete, and the time that you have available in the session. You can go anywhere from 7 to 15. It really shouldn't take that long. It really doesn't take that long. It has to be quick and efficient and to the point. These are some examples of some high performance warm-up programs. The FIFA 11 Plus is a fantastic program. It was actually made because FIFA, as a worldwide organization, said that injuries in soccer are a public health crisis. And because soccer is the most popular sport around the world, And because these players are getting injured so often, we need to do something about it. So they made the 11 plus, and they specifically made it so that any team, anywhere, can do it with no equipment. The best part about it is it's insanely effective. Teams that have adopted just the FIFA 11 plus have shown injury rates 40% lower than teams who have not adopted a warm-up program. Again, super quick, super easy to do. They have great pamphlets and handouts for it. So if you're looking for it, you can easily find it on Google. Another example is the PEP program, Prevent Injury and Enhance Performance. Again, taking that next level of not only keeping them somewhat healthy and on the field, but enhancing their performance. And you'll see as we go through these programs that it goes away from just the stretching and the dynamic flexibility and all that, and it starts to add in things like plyometric and agility and speed. And what we've come to learn is that these things, they improve performance, but because they're improving performance and strength and agility and power and speed, they're also helping to prevent injury. So at this point, we've completed the warm-up portion of our training session. We can now move on to speed and strength training, which, if done correctly, athletes may not even notice that you've incorporated that because you can do it within the warm-up session as well. So improving speed is by far the #1 asset of a sports medicine team outside of keeping players healthy. Speed always wins. And to improve your speed, you have to do 3 things. You have to improve mechanics. For players to get faster, they have to be efficient with their movements. And I like to consider improving mechanics like increasing the amount of miles per gallon in a car, right? The fuel is the same, the car is the same, but if you could just tweak it to be a little bit more efficient, then yeah, you'll be faster. Strength training, super important. Speed is made by players producing force into the ground in a horizontal plane. You can only go as fast as your muscles are pushing into the ground. If you're not able to produce a lot of force, you won't be able to go faster. It's the equivalent of putting a nice strong engine in a car. If the engine is weak, the car goes slow. If the engine is strong, the car will go faster. If you can improve the amount of strength that your muscles can produce, the athlete will run faster. #3 is sprinting a lot, because points #1 and 2, they're very much improving the foundation, but so to speak, it's not building the house. For you to apply 1 and 2, you have to do #3, which is sprint training, 2 to 3 times per week. And the most important thing out of that is a quality sprint session. We're going to get into that right now, what makes a quality sprint session. And if you guys want, I would take a picture of the slide or screenshot it, because this is very, very important. And if a sprint session isn't done correctly, you're not going to make them stronger, you're not going to make them faster, and you could enhance the risk of injury. For a good sprint distance, on this slide, I have between 20 and 40 meters. That's a little bit on the high end. I would do anywhere from 10 to 40. To get the proper volume, you're going to need, in total, a good sprint session should have anywhere from 250 to 400 meters every session. If you break that up, 20 to 40 meters per sprint, you're going to get about 4 to 8 sprints per session. Rest time is super important. This is the #1 thing that differentiates a good session from a bad session, is the rest time. You're going to need about 1 minute of rest for every 10 meters in the sprinting distance. If the rest isn't there, the energy systems that you're using, all the ATP, PCR, glycolysis, all that stuff, it's not recharging. And now you're using more aerobic systems instead of anaerobic. The anaerobic system needs time to recharge. It needs 2 to 3 minutes. If you guys are in a situation where you have timing gates where you can actually measure sprint times, you'll be able to see that if you don't give the proper time, the sprint times drastically decrease. Intensity, super important. This goes hand in hand with rest time. For you to improve your speed and for you to increase the amount of endurance in your hamstrings through sprinting and high-speed running, you have to be running at this is an absolute minimum, 85% of max speed. Now, again, if you don't have timing gates, that's okay. They've actually done studies, and athletes with pretty good reliability can estimate how fast they're going. A minimum of 85% speed is an absolute must. If you want to get faster and you want to condition the hamstrings, it's more along the lines of about 90, 95%. And you should really be hitting 95% at least once every 2 weeks. If you are doing a sprint session and you feel like the athletes are out of breath or they look like they're slowing down, that session is now over. It does not matter what you have on your pamphlet. It doesn't matter what you have planned. The session is over because they are not going to get the benefits of whatever you were planning to do for the rest of that day. So again, this right here, it's in a very idealistic world, right? And if you do have the time and the space to be able to do 8 sprints with 2 to 3 minutes of rest, now you're looking at least 16 minutes here. That's great. If you work for an academy or you work for a team, maybe they do 2 sessions a day, maybe you have the time for that. A lot of clubs and a lot of coaches and a lot of strength and conditioning staff and athletic trainers don't have that luxury. So you may have to incorporate the sprint session within the technical and tactical portions of training. Again, this is why learning about soccer training sessions is important. This is why having a good relationship with your coaching staff is important. This is why maybe doing some licensing courses are important, because you're going to have to learn how to implement the ball within a drill to, 1, get the benefits that you want to get, being maximum speed, and 2, get the benefits that the coach wants to get, which depends what they want to get out of the session. So again, you can microdose the sprint training within the rest of the session. You can add it to the technical and tactical portion of the practice, with the one caveat of those 2 very important principles that we talked about on the previous slide: intensity and rest. If the intensity isn't 85% speed or higher, then it's not going to work. If they're not getting enough rest, then it's not going to work. What we're about to go over is a soccer drill that I think is relatively good, that can fit within the confines of a training session, that will allow you to have all of these within these parameters. So an example, again, right, to have a proper speed session, we need to be somewhere between 10 and 40 meters. So in this practical example, we're going to use a distance of 30 meters, point A to point B. We could simply have them run in a straight line for that distance, or we can implement it within a practical session. So let's add a ball, let's add a goal. Let's add a ball on one end, let's add a goal on the other, and we'll have that distance between the 2 be those 30 meters, right? So let's add 2 players. Player, we'll call it red and yellow. Red will have a little bit of a head start on yellow. What's most important out of this are 2 things. 1, the red player is ahead of the yellow. That's the proper setup. To have a good sprint session, or any session in general, setup has to be key. So you have to set that up in advance. Point number 2 are the rules of the game. In this case, the rule of the game is the red player is going to sprint towards the ball. The yellow player is also going to do the same. Whoever gets to the ball first is going to be an attacker. Whoever gets there second is going to be the defender. Now, if we go back to our first principle of, proper setup, you'll clearly see that the player in red is going to get there first if they run at a good intensity, if they run at their 85, 90, 95% sprint speed. So these players run down. Red player gets there first, yellow player gets there second, red player is attacking, yellow is on defense. So they go from here to here. Now it's a 1v1 with the goal of scoring on the goal on target, right? So the red player has to be able to beat the yellow player 1v1, get past them, and score on goal. Now, if you bring this up to a soccer coach and say, hey, I have this wonderful drill. When are we going to do 1v1s? When is a good time in your micro or your mesocycle where you're going to work on 1v1 attacking and defending, because when you do, I have the perfect sprint drill for it. Now you guys are working together, you're collaborating. Now, this drill goes on. Let's say the red player wins. What's another important aspect of sprint training? Proper rest time. This whole process to get from here to scoring on goal is probably going to take about 30 to 45 seconds. Now, if you have 3 more players in the running, you'll be able to see that in total, this whole cycle will take about 2 to 3 minutes. That's perfect. Because again, our distance here is 30 meters. We need about 1 minute of rest for every 10 meters, which means we need about 3 minutes of rest. If you add it up here, the timing works out perfectly, where by the time the player finishes, the next team goes. It's perfect timing. Every time the players start this drill, they will be at maximum intensity. They'll be able to reach their 85, 90, 90% speeds, and they'll be able to get the goals out of the session in general. Now, you can easily manipulate the numbers around here, depending on the amount of players on your team, and you can set up multiple grids. Now here we have, 16 players participating in one drill. If you had more, you can simply throw in more grids. You can even set up a competitive environment where you have one grid as the easiest, the one is the hardest. If you win, you go up. If you lose, you go down. And the goal is to stay at the top for the longest. Now it's competitive. Now the head coach likes it. So again, a very practical example of how you can take something as simple as a 30-meter sprint and integrate it within a training session, still allow for all of the fundamentals of speed training to happen, but do it within a soccer-specific manner. Again, so key things out of this is adding the ball to the drill. We're microdosing within the training session. We're staying at game speed, 85, 90, 95%, resting 2 to 3 minutes. Again, if they're out of breath or if it looks like they're slowing down, consider altering the drill. And here I say consider altering because now we're within the soccer session. And, we can't be too autocratic with our sprint speeds and our times and everything like that, because now we're working with the head coach. So consider altering it instead of just cutting it off in general. Huge point of emphasis here. Sprint training is injury prevention. If you look at the burden, the #1 injury burden for soccer players, and injury burden is a little bit different than injury rates, because if you look at what injury burden is, it's how many times this injury happened and how long are they out for. Hamstrings are by far #1 if you look at throughout the soccer literature. Higher than ACL, higher than MCL, higher than meniscus, higher than all that, because hamstring injuries happen a lot. But hamstring injuries are soft tissue injuries. And we know that as MSK providers, we can hopefully start to reduce the risk or prevent them. And if you have a proper sprint training program, you are going to condition those hamstrings to be so robust, so reliable, that with any spike of load over a long tournament or weekend, you'll be able to withstand it. What's most important for these players is they have what we call a very strong chronic workload for sprint volume. And if you look at sprint volume, I'll encourage you guys, and if I can, I'll try and find the research article for this. For every 5 to 10% of increased sprint speed, so if you go from 80 to 85%, hamstring activity goes up like multiple fold. So it is super important, again, for them to reach those high velocities. Let's talk about strength training. Also super important. And for any player, ideally, what we would like is the following. We would like them to engage in strength training 2 to 3 times per week. We would like you to train 2 to 3 exercises per muscle group, both upper, lower, and core. Ideally, we would like for 48 to 72 hours of recovery between each training session. And ideally, we'd like 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 sets of 4 to 12 reps, depending on what you're looking for in that part of the training cycle. I say ideally for all of these because if you have a soccer player in season, it is going to be close to impossible to do all of this. This is ideal for a off season or ideal for a player who only trains maybe 2 to 3 times per week. What's more realistic is this. And I think this holds for soccer as well as honestly most youth sports. Strength training 1 to 2 times per week. 1 is non-negotiable. 1 is non-negotiable because that will keep you, again, at that first phase of where a profession started, of maintaining and keeping athletes just healthy enough. If you want to improve, you're going to need to. You're going to need 2 to 3 sets of 4 to 12 reps. You're going to have a strong emphasis on single leg exercises. This is so important because whenever injuries happen, most of them happen when you're in a single leg stance position. And single leg training is so important because if you're in a practical environment, you might not have all the weights and the equipment and all the bands that you want. But when you go on a single leg, you just automatically doubled your body weight. That's a pretty good benefit. You're also going to want 1 to 2 body weight exercises per muscle group that you can do anywhere at any time with minimal equipment. And an absolute must, this is so important. If you're in season, you're going to have heavy emphasis, very heavy emphasis on education and off-season strengthening. So that off-season strengthening goes back to those ideal perspectives that we saw on this slide. So you can build up your strength. You can have it increase because once we're in season here, we're pretty much in maintenance mode. Heavy emphasis on education for not only strength and conditioning and fitness, but also things like nutrition, things like hydration, things like proper sleep, things like good social activity and behaviors. That is so important to keeping them healthy as well. Again, so these high performance warm-up routines, they are including strength training within them these days. FIFA 11 Plus and the PEP both have specific sections for strength training. So definitely look those over when you guys have a chance. And these are just some examples of exercises you can do on the pitch, on the field, in the gym if you're working basketball. You can do these pretty much everywhere. And if you guys want, you can take a screenshot or take a picture of this. Some of them I'm going to highlight because I think in particular, they are extremely important. Nordic hamstrings. Sometimes these get a bad rap because they're difficult and athletes claim that they make them very, very sore. If you take the effort and the time to properly program them and periodize them within a start of a preseason training session, you won't have any issues. You'll have issues if you try Nordics 3 times 8 Nordics starting week 4 of the season when athletes have 2-a-days, right? If you start at the beginning of the season, beginning of preseason, of starting with some nice solid isometrics and then doing some concentrics and then slowly building in eccentrics like 2 sets of 3, next week 2 sets of 4, the athletes will be okay with it. But other than sprinting, the Nordic hamstring exercise is by far one of the most important things that you can do to make hamstrings more resilient. And again, hamstring injuries have the highest burden out of almost any injury in sports. So if you can help that, that's a huge win. Adductor raises, the Copenhagen adductor program, super effective at reducing the risk and strengthening the groin. If you have an athlete who's coming out from a groin injury, I'm pretty much okay with saying that they need to do the Copenhagen adductor progression. Super easy to do, and you can modify it to do on the field with a partner or with a bleacher, so that way you can do it on your own. Hamstring walkouts are a favorite of mine. I like doing them because they're a little bit easier than Nordics, and if you're looking for something to build up to, then using that to get up to the Nordics are super important. Dead bugs. This is so key for goalkeepers, which to be honest, they deserve their own presentation. But dead bugs will help keep those deeper core muscles, those multifidi, the transverse abdominis. It'll help keep those strong. And particularly with goalkeepers, they're going into extension a lot. They're going into lumbar extension a ton. And they're going to need their dynamic stabilizers, being the core muscles, to be able to keep their spine stable. So maybe they'll avoid an injury like a spondylolisthesis, right? So again, very important. There's tons of exercises you can do. And now we've kind of worked through the first 3 sessions or the first 3 aspects of our training session. We've done our high performance warm up. We've integrated speeds training. We've done our strength training. We've maybe mixed in some speed with the technical and tactical portions of the head coach's portion of the training session. And then comes the cool down, right? And the best thing about the cool down is you can almost do whatever you want with it. In my opinion, what I like to do for the cool down is allow the athletes to lower their heart rate, to bring them back down to earth, so to speak, and to have an opportunity to check in with them, to sit everybody down in a circle and say, hey, how was training? Hey, Joe, how you feeling? I know you were coming back from this injury. How did training go? Hey, Sammy, how did those sprints look? You look pretty fast, man. Good work. You've been putting in that effort. I see you. Checking in with them. And I like doing that while I'm doing lower intensity strength exercises. So something like maybe a 3-step goblet squat, where you're just kind of just going through the motions up and down. Something like bridges. You can easily talk to an athlete while they're doing bridges. The intensity isn't high enough where they can't hold the conversation. Static stretching. If you know you have a group of athletes, let's say a group of young boys who are going through a growth spurt, now is the perfect time to do some quad and hamstring stretching. And again, through that, you can have a conversation. If you want to do some balance work, now they're in a state of fatigue. If somebody was, having no issues with balance at the start of the session, now would be a good time to challenge them. So you can do so much with the cool down. If you look at the literature, it'll mostly say there's not a huge effect, but you can really take that time and make with it what you want and be able to get a good outcome from your athletes. And now we've worked through the entire training session. And what's most important, I think, is in this kind of diagram, everything looks segmented. It looks separate. But as you start to work in higher level environments, it all looks blended, and it's tough to tell when things switch over. And I don't think that needs to be unique or that needs to be reserved for higher level sport. I think we can do it at the grassroots level. I think we can do it at the high school level. I think it takes effort, dedication, communication, but it's something that honestly can make the difference between a good team and a team that needs improvement. And if you're able to implement this, I think that the coaching staff will notice, and you'll be a better prized asset because of this. Just some quick myth busts that I kind of wanted to touch on in this presentation. Players don't have time to do speed and strength training. As you've seen, we can do all of it within 7 to 15 minutes. And if you have a relationship with the coaching staff, you can integrate it within the session. A big one that players will always bring up at any level: I don't want to get slower if I gain muscle. Point number one, it is so hard for soccer players and most youth athletes to gain muscle because they're burning so many calories, and they would have to eat a ton and do a ton of strength training to truly gain the amount of muscle mass that they're scared of gaining. But muscle mass doesn't make you slower. It does not make you slower. It could make you heavier. In fact, if you gain good amounts of lean muscle mass, it will make you heavier. But what's important to educate these athletes on is that muscle mass is producing more force for you. Therefore, you could get faster because of it. And I always like to bring up examples of NFL players, or even some bigger soccer players, in particular Adama Traore, and I give them practical examples of that guy is huge. Look at his legs. They're massive. Is he slow? Yes or no? They'll say no. And it says, okay. So that just proves that having muscle doesn't make you slower. I also like to use an analogy of muscle mass is like beefing up a car engine. And if you have a Ferrari with a heavy engine, that's a really fast car. Do you want to be fast or slow? That's another one I like to use. Another myth is, players can't really engage in this stuff if they don't have gym access. And as we've seen, there's a lot of body weight exercises you can do anywhere at any time with zero equipment that can make you stronger and faster. So that is pretty much it. We can open it up for questions. This is my contact here. If anybody has anything in particular, feel free to message or email me on Instagram, Twitter, or through my Gmail. Yeah, I guess Dr. Henny, if we have questions, we can kind of go through those.
All right, perfect. The first question up here looks like that followed right up after you had asked, or after you had suggested that goalkeepers need their own talks, but they were asking about the difference between, Kristen was asking about the difference between how you would warm up a goalkeeper versus warming up a position player.
Yes, that is a very good question. To be completely honest, that is something I'm still working on. If I am given the whole team, I will often include the goalkeepers within the warm-up, because a lot of the movements they're going to do, they would benefit from doing a very similar warm-up as a field player. In particular for goalkeepers, what I like to do is, if you have the space and time, work with them inside before you send them out to the field. So you can do some dynamic shoulder exercises and stability exercises indoors before they go out, because oftentimes when they do go out, they'll go straight off to the goalkeeping coach, and you won't be able to really work with them too much. I would say core work is very important to include, especially keeping that spine nice and stable with young keepers and spondies, as well as shoulder stability. I would 100% make sure that they still do their sprint training. 100% necessary, because they're going to be making the most aggressive sprints out of everybody on the field. And with most teams, they're not going to be able to have the training to build that sprint volume. And if they happen to have a weekend tournament when they have to do 7-8 sprints in one day, they might have not done that for years, even if they're 16, 17 years old. And their risk of injury for that is relatively higher. So make sure they include it in the sprint training too.
Would you account for they go through a lot larger of a range of motion with their kicks as compared with some, unless you're doing place kicks for if a foul gets called?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could include some more specific stuff like that. I know a lot of times with goalkeeping coaches, they'll actually use the frame of the goal as a tool, and they kind of line up the keepers along them, and they can do some like hamstring kicks and things like that. And again, it is with keepers, I'll say it might be even more important to make the warm up specific to their session, because keepers are unique in the fact that field players, their highest load, their highest kind of dose of workload is during a game. Keepers are the exact opposite. They get killed during practice. And whenever they have a point of emphasis, it will be emphasized again and again and again. And if they're working on goal kicks, they're doing like 100 of them. And their warm-up, I think, has to be tailored to that.
All right, well, we had over 100 people here, so certainly a big attendance turnout today. If anyone has any questions, I'm just going to run through our brief post talk, and then if there are any burning last minute ones, I'll throw those to Andy here. But you're going to receive an email 1 hour after the webinar concludes, which includes a link to the combined quiz, evaluation, and assessment. You will have 72 hours to complete that in order to receive your live CEUs. You can contact us with questions. This is our email, and we have our upcoming journal club talk next month on jockeying, which is horseback riding, and then that's what we have here. Well, thank you so much, Andy. We definitely appreciate your time. I know this is a later than our typical time frame, but we have been asked by many of the California and West Coast athletic trainers to provide something that's a little bit more accessible for kind of everyone on all of their different schedules. And so I do appreciate you being willing to speak and giving such a great talk on soccer, fitness, and rehabilitation.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, if anybody has any questions or anything, feel free to message or email me, and I'll be happy to answer them.
Awesome. Have a great night, everyone.